yeah, very, very happy. And it's a privilege to actually be here and to be speaking about this quality, which I feel is critical to life and relationships, right? With that, so a lot of talk about empathy. So what is empathy, right? And Nicey did kind of cover what it is. Let's move a little more deeper into what it is. And to introduce the concept of empathy to you, I would like to do it with a story, right, from history. And so this is the story of a lady named Harriet Beecher Stowe, right? And she's the one who wrote a best-selling book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Some of you may have read it. It's from the 19th century. About Harriet Beecher Stowe, right? Let's call her Harriet. So she was one of the most influential women, like, of the 19th century, right? And she was raised in a very well-to-do, rich family. She grew up like any other upper class white American woman, right? Within a very comfortable home. She was very educated, loved, right? She later even got married to a friend and gave birth to 7 children. So everything was good for her, you know, a very happy, good life. While growing up, Harriet was very observant of what was going around. And she noticed that there were numerous migrants moving to the city of Cincinnati where she lived, right? And especially escaped slaves. And, and Harriet, met with several African-American slaves who had often been attacked and persecuted because they were the ones who worked at her home. And so she had somewhat of an access to these slaves. And in 1851, a tragedy struck Harriet that changed the course of her life, right? She lost her 18-month-old baby to a bout of cholera, right? And the crushing pain that she suffered at the death of her son, it awoke in her empathy for enslaved mothers. And why is that? Because during that time, there was a practice where enslaved mothers or slave women, as soon as they give birth to a baby, these children were often snatched from their hands in order to be sold at the slave markets. And losing a kid helped her empathize with these women who used to so early on in life, like just lose their kids, right? And her intense distress at the loss of a child, even that's what pushed her to write this novel called Uncle Tom's Cabin. And this book is all about the story of a Black slave, right, who was taken away from his family at a very young age and sold at an auction. Right? It's a fiction that she wrote around this theme, and the insensitive conditions that slaves, used to live under. These were described in detail in the book, and this led to widespread anger across the West and led to revolutionary protests against slavery for the first time in history, right? Which ultimately led to anti-slavery policies, right? And during and even after, at a later time frame. Around 300 copies of the book were sold in America alone. Over 1 million copies were sold in Britain. Since then, Uncle Tom's Cabin has been published in over 75 languages all over the world, right? And it's a brilliant book. It's very, very noteworthy, and it's beautiful, right? How an empathic experience of a white woman is what led to massive rebellion against the social evil of slavery that was plaguing African, slaves across the West. Right, and this really did turn the course of history for the better, right? So I narrated the story so that you, understand the power that empathy has to not just change each and every one of our lives, but even the course of history, right? And with that, let's just look at what empathy is before we move on. So just look at that. I just wanted to share a picture. Now that we've spoken about a story, let's also have a face to the name. Like, this is Harriet. And this is the book that she wrote, right? Uncle Tom's Cabin. And with that, now let's look at the definition or basically what empathy is. I've taken it from Carl Rogers. He's apparently, or he is one of the most influential, I would say, humanist psychologists, for those who know psychology, it's his definition of empathy. So, but again, I've changed it up a little bit so that it's simpler, because his is a little more complicated. So empathy is the process of stepping into the shoes of another person, which has already been covered, right? In order to see the world through their eyes by entering into their thoughts and feelings so that we can take appropriate actions but with the realization that their world is theirs and your world is distinct from it, right? So a couple of things that I've underlined: stepping into the shoes of another person, or basically just seeing the world through somebody else's eyes, right? That's the common definition of empathy. Something else that you need to remember anytime you think of empathy is that empathy is about understanding what the thoughts, specifically thoughts of a person are, or the person you're trying to empathize with are, what that person's feelings are, and also taking appropriate actions after an understanding of these thoughts and feelings. And along with that, one of the most critical aspects of empathy, which none of us really, think about, and that is empathy should always be practiced with the realization that your world is yours and my world is mine. I mean, if I'm trying to practice empathy, let's say with Nicey here, right? I should know that her world is hers and mine is mine, right? If at all we do not have that realization, what ends up happening is that we get overworked. If Nicey is really upset and I'm really feeling and thinking all about what she's going through, and I'm sitting here and really reliving it myself, then there's nothing positive that really comes out of it, right? It's more or less, it's called emotional contagion. There's a word for it, or you can even call it compassion fatigue. When you are compassionate towards somebody so much to such an extent that you get tired, right? So this is where the question of boundaries come. It's extremely important to have boundaries even when you empathize, so that something positive actually comes out of it and you're not really pulled down. And along with that, I also wanted to just quickly touch upon 3 aspects. And with this, no more theory or stuff like this. So cognitive empathy, affective empathy, and compassionate empathy. These are, what makes, and the fourth one would be, boundaries. The first one, cognitive empathy, is basically when I try to think. Cognition is thoughts, right? So what the thoughts of somebody else or the one I'm empathizing with is. So if it's Nicey, then what are her thoughts exactly right now? What is she thinking, right? Affective empathy, it's all about emotions. What is she feeling right now? Is she excited, nervous? Like, what exactly is that feeling that she feels? Compassionate empathy is now after I understand a person's thoughts and feelings, and then I decide, okay, there's something I need to do for her, right? And then I take an action that is appropriate and relevant for her, then that is what is compassionate empathy, right? So cognitive, all about thoughts; affective, understanding feelings; and compassionate empathy. After cognitive and affective, you generally tend to take a positive action towards a person, and that's what compassionate empathy is all about, right? So yeah, and this also brings me to a very, very important thing that you need to remember again about empathy. It's a huge misunderstanding we have when it comes to discussions around empathy. Empathy is not projection, right? Sometimes we say that, okay, if I were in that position, what would I feel? So let's say a student behaves very rudely in the staff room, right, in front of other teachers, and you're a teacher, you're embarrassed, right? Obviously, some of you may feel really angry. Like, let's say I'm that teacher and I feel really angry at, a student who just kind of behaved rudely with me in front of others, right? And so I'm, and suppose if you are trying to think like, okay, if you want to practice empathy, you're like, okay, if I were in her position, or if I'm trying to empathize with somebody, okay, if I were in that person's position, this is what I'm going to feel. I'm going to feel angry. But you must realize that somebody else is a whole different person. How they view a stimulus, how they view something is very, very different. So for the same stimulus, let's say for the same situation that we just described here of a student behaving rudely in the staff room, I may behave with anger. Somebody else may behave how? With sadness, right? Maybe a student behaving rudely might make them sad, not really angry. The way each and every one of us react to a situation is different. And understanding that is very, very, very important when it comes to empathy. Because empathy is not just because I feel this way, that person also feels that way. No, that's projection. You're projecting your feelings on somebody. That's not empathy. It's accurately understanding that that other person is a whole different person. The way they react to situations is different, and trying to understand how they accurately might react to a situation, right? Now, all this being said, I always say this, this discussion of empathy, it's just never complete without or discussing self-empathy. I would say self-empathy is the core of any empathy practice, right? You are not going to be able to practice empathy accurately, well, meaningfully, unless and until you know what self-empathy is and you practice it. And so what is self-empathy, right? Self-empathy is basically, having a very clear awareness about where you are, right? And what all chaos is going on within you, so that you're able to hold space for other people. So just having an awareness and, being able to center yourself so that you are able to actually hold space for other people, right? Now, let's say the earlier example that I said, a student behaved very, very rudely with me in the staff room, right? And now I go into the classroom. I'm really upset. I'm angry. I'm not at all pleased with what happened, right? And lots of thoughts and chaos is just going on in my head. And this is how I go into another classroom to teach. What will my mindset be, right? Will I actually be in a space where I'm actually thinking about, oh, this is probably what, the students want. This is how I need to maybe, take today's session so that it's the most effective, and things like that. So will I be in a position to do all that when so much of negative emotions and chaos is going on in my head? No, it's going to be really, really difficult, right? It's going to be very, very difficult, right? And there's also this aspect where, let's say, and if at this point, when you're going through all this chaos, a student comes to you with a genuine problem, right? How open will you be to actually, listening to that person? How well, even if you do listen, how well do you think you're going to be listening to that person? How well do you think you can empathize? Just, step into that student's shoes, really understand where he or she is coming from. So this is why self-empathy is important. Being aware of yourself, what your emotions are, what these physiological changes that you go through when you're experiencing an emotion, what are the thoughts that come into your mind? What are the reaction tendencies that you usually show? When have you actually spent a couple of, minutes just sitting and thinking about, these sort of things previously, right? But this is the foundation of practicing empathy, of everything, to be honest, of connection as human beings. So self-empathy is basically, like I said, being more aware of yourself, right? And once you're aware of yourself, then you will be in a position. So if at all, like, let's say one thing that I regularly practice is this practice called centering, right? It's a small meditative practice where before I began this session, what I would do is I'd just spend a few minutes just breathing, just focusing and bringing my attention back to my own self, right? What's really going on within me, trying to center myself, all the chaos, because obviously before any talk, you will have a little bit of jitters. You will be wondering, oh, how is it going to be? How many people are going to be there? All these sort of questions naturally will come to, someone who's speaking, right? And so just breathing, just centering myself. And obviously I come, like, I had a long day. There were a lot of things that happened today in my life from the moment I woke up until now, right? And so, all of these obviously are going to be, taking up headspace, right? And so I just practice a few minutes of centering so that I calm myself down. All the chaos is kind of, toned down. Now I'm in a position to better think from all your perspectives. Now I'm in a position where I can hold space for your questions, for anything that you have to say, your comments, your suggestions, whatever, like even to your lives. So this is where self-empathy is important. And this is also why self-empathy, I always say, is the first step, to practicing empathy, because only when you are, in control of yourself and you're able to regulate yourself and center yourself, only then will you be in a position to hold space for other people, to even think about other people. So yeah. And why empathy, right? I've been, all this empathy. So empathy, these are just, some studies. I'm not even stating what I want to say. It's all scientifically backed. Empathy contributes to happiness and well-being, irrespective of age. Numerous studies that have shown that empathy plays a positive role in interpersonal relationships, and especially in marital relationships. Not surprising, right? When you're actually able to think from the perspective of your spouse, obviously, conflicts are going to be, solved much easier. Empathy increases helping behavior in people. Again, not a surprise, right? An increase in empathy can reduce sexual assaults and incidents of domestic violence. Again, proven. Empathy fights inequality. Empathy reduces racism. It fights prejudice. It fights bullying. Like, it boosts creativity, one of the most important skill sets of the 21st century, right? And maybe that's the reason why you have this very, very powerful process of design thinking, right? Which is very, very popular these days. And empathy is at the root of design thinking. You need to empathize with customers before you go ahead and sell them anything, right? So these are all, because I've been told that there are a lot of teachers and parents and all over here, so which is why I really want to talk about this program, Roots of Empathy. It's a Canadian program, right? It's an empathy education initiative which was started by this lady named Mary Gordon. She is so Mary Gordon is a parenting expert, right? And and this Roots of Empathy program is actively practiced in schools and childcare centers across 14 countries. It has become widely accepted, to be honest. And as part of this program, what happens is every class adopts a baby, right, who's occasionally brought into the classrooms. Some his or her parents might accompany the baby, and then what happens is the baby is then kids are encouraged to sit in a large circle, all the kids in the classroom, so maybe a first graders or second graders, whoever, and the baby is put at the center of the circle, right? And these kids are then encouraged to watch the baby, and they discuss the baby's emotional responses and what all the baby's doing. If it's crying, okay, why is the baby crying? If the baby is laughing or making some sort of a gesture or whatever, so then these kids are encouraged to talk about what exactly the baby is going through, right? And this is a way of teaching kids empathy, right? And multiple studies on Roots of Empathy program have shown again and again that empathy, this Roots of Empathy program has dramatically reduced playground bullying. It encouraged cooperation in the students who actually went through this program. It improved children's relationships, not just with their peers in classrooms, but also with their parents. And the most fundamental finding, it even improved their grades, right? And so studies in Scotland in 2010 apparently found that this program increased pro-social behavior in children by 55%. And pro-social behavior is so important at this time, especially because of how kids are so addicted to mobile phones, right? I mean they don't want to socialize. They just want to watch something like YouTube or whatever on phones. And at this time, pro-social behavior is so critical, right? And so, yeah, now that we've discussed a lot of these things, I would like to move on to the concept of prejudice, right? What is prejudice? What is bias? Does anyone want to maybe just say a word or two about what prejudice means to you? And also feel free to just type out whatever you feel in the chat. What is prejudice? Or just to maybe, make it a little interesting, what we'll do is let's do a small activity, right? Hold on. I'll show you a picture. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to actually step into the shoes of that person you see in the picture. And it's just a picture, and it's just a very small basic activity. And then I'm going to ask you to empathize with that person and tell me what that person's life is like. What do you think this person's general, like everyday life is like? What are their thoughts, dreams? Like, try to practice. This is one opportunity. So imagine this is the lady that I wanted to show you, and imagine like you're in a bus and maybe this lady is sitting opposite to you, or maybe you cross her on a long journey and she's just sitting there, right? And you see her. So tell me, like, what do you what are her thoughts? Cognitive empathy. What are her feelings? Affective empathy. What are her, let's not go into compassionate empathy right now, but what are her thoughts, feelings? Even otherwise, what do you think her life is like for this woman, right? That you just meet on a train journey or on a bus journey or something like that. And I know it's impossible, like without knowing a person, to really go into the details of what that person is. And but this is just a small, simple activity. So from what you see, right, let's try and come up with some, thoughts on what this lady's life is like. Feel free to just put it in the chat. Yes, you see, yeah, Deepa says, an old woman who's alone. Yeah. Possibly, right? At that age. Anything else? Her expressions, what do they say? Is she happy? Is she, oh, she looks tired. Yeah. Yeah, I can see Ajin and Parvada, like I'm sorry, I may pronounce your name wrong, and I don't want to do that. So, but yeah, very tired. Nasser says shy. Varghese says alone but managing. Yeah. Thank you so much for putting in your thoughts. Yeah, she may be a very bold lady who has a lot of hard experience as well said, Sri Lakshmi. Yeah, possible, right? Yes, so now that we have some inputs that have come up, she's confident, very good. Shailaja, yeah. Hiding her feelings with her smile, very possible. Yeah, I'm so glad to see so many inputs. Yeah, looks like someone who's really social. I'm glad, Sankita, because I wouldn't have, felt the same. See, look at how diverse sort of, opinions are coming up. Beautiful. Just smile at her. If possible, try to talk to her. Yeah, Parvati would go ahead and, maybe if, in the bus, she would just walk up to her, smile at her, and maybe even interact. We cannot judge by another's looks. We need to interact with her. Excellent, Geeta. Yeah, that is basically what the moral of this entire activity is, right? There's very limited that you can actually judge by, anyone's looks. But the fact of the matter is that, unfortunately, we have a brain that very often, the moment it, lays eyes on a person, immediately from all the experiences we have gathered in all our life, right? All the experiences we have gathered over the years. Yeah, right, Geeta. Looks are often deceptive. But unfortunately, like, the moment you all, saw me today, right? When I came online, I'm pretty sure your brain would have just, made some sort of an assumption or some sort of, a picture as to what this person possibly is like. That is actually a very evolutionary sort of, survival, sort of tactic that our brain uses so that the brain is able to understand, right? Whether, the person in front of them is a danger or whatnot. So every time you lay your eyes on a person, 100 things come into your mind. And these things that come into your mind, they are based on your experiences right from the time you were a kid up until now, the genetic makeup that you have, the sort of experiences and, difficulties that you yourself face in your life, right? So it's a combination of all of this, right? And which is why more than often we end up, because, judging a person wrongly, right? Stereotyping, excellent. Yeah, prejudice. Yeah, these are different words in which we can and say this, stereotyping, bias, and stuff like that. So now I'm going to show you, or I'm going to tell you a little more about this person, but I also want to show you who this person is, right? Not, yeah, just so, do you see this person? That's Wonder Woman. Or at least she is a stunt woman. And this is also her. Her name is Kitty O'Neill, right? Her name is Kitty O'Neill. And so a little more about Kitty O'Neill. She was an American stunt woman. She was also a racer, as you can see in the picture, right? And she's also known as the fastest woman in the world, right? She's a champion swimmer, an award-winning diver, a racer in motorcycle and car competitions, right? Her athletic ability, combined with her willingness to, she was very open to trying out new challenges. And this led her to becoming one of Hollywood's most popular and top stunt people, right? But the most surprising thing about Kitty is the fact that she lost her hearing as a baby and therefore became completely deaf as a child, right? But she believed and propagated that deaf people can do anything, right? And later in life, she suffered several other illnesses. She went through even cancer, but she overcame all these challenges and she lived until she turned 72, right? So just to give you an idea as to, I'm pretty sure that no matter how much you wanted to, it's impossible for us to make a complete, accurate sort of an impression about a person, without really getting to know them in depth, right? And which is why prejudice is harmful, right? In situations when you're making up, or you're thinking, or all these sort of negative biases just come into your mind, and this is something I would say some of the most evil, social issues that we face in today's society is a result of bias, right? How many of us have seen time and again in newspapers where communities, a certain people belonging to a certain community, a certain religion, a certain, caste and whatnot, and, how many times have we seen these sort of people struggle and be discriminated against and whatnot, right? And bias is where it all takes root. And I think these sort of discussions around bias is extremely important, because one of the first things that we can do in order to overcome stereotypes. A lot of you, I can see even from the comments, are careful before you stereotype somebody. But even then, all of us, no matter how well intentioned we are, there are times when we, without even knowing it, very subconsciously, very subconsciously, we tend to practice bias. So it all begins with awareness. Fighting prejudice, it always begins with awareness, right? Knowing how our minds work, and knowing that, like, it's a culmination of our genes and our experiences that kind of give us this lens through which we look at the world, and knowing that this lens can give us very wrong ideas, which are not really right all the time, right? And so knowing that is extremely critical. So it all begins with awareness. And then what can you do? Next time, try to stop yourself before you try to stereotype somebody. If there's a community that you practice hatred against, or if there is somebody you just don't like, so many times in my life personally as a student, I remember, like, even while in college, or even later in life, sometimes you see a person, even at a workplace, you see a person, and I just don't like that person. You don't even know why, right? It's this lens of yours that's talking, and later on, when you actually end up having like a lot of conversations with them, they turn out to become wonderful people who really do play a very beautiful role in your life. So this is why you need to catch yourself every time. So next time you see somebody and you just don't like them, or any community, or anything for that matter, even at your workplace, you don't really like somebody, just stop and just rethink, and remind yourself that I'm it's my stereotyping, or it's my biases talking. So I need to really reevaluate the way I see that person, right? And as teachers, it's so critical, right? I mean, students of all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of families, you don't even know what struggles, or what all they're actually going through at home, and they are the ones who actually come to the classroom every single day, right? And as educationalists, or people who are leaders in the education domain, it's so critical that you fight prejudice beyond, before anybody else do, right? And and so with that, I also wanted to, this whole talk about prejudice just reminded me of something called the Pygmalion effect. I don't know whether you've heard about it before. It's a very powerful process where, if you have high expectations about somebody, realistically high expectations about somebody, they tend to perform better. You won't believe it. There have been studies done among teachers where what happens is, you go ahead and tell a teacher, it's more or less a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you go and tell a teacher that, in one study in the class, the IQ of every student was tested. And then a couple of students who did not have high IQ, they were just average students. So a couple of average students were, chosen. And then the teacher who's teaching them went in, told, this person here, they were given the list of these students and said, these kids have very high IQ. They're very smart, even though they were actually normal IQ students. And you won't believe it, by the end of the year, these normal IQ kids were the ones who were the top performing in class. Because subconsciously, teachers started behaving in such a way to these, students who supposedly, or who the teacher believed were high IQ students, that they actually began to perform really better, right? And this is what is known as the Pygmalion effect. So which also shows, the power that each and every one of us hold when we keep expectations about others. But the only other side of, Pygmalion effect is that, always keep realistic expectations. You can't expect a kid who is, having some learning disability to actually, be the topper of a class or anything like that. So when you keep realistic expectations, Pygmalion effect, or these, it works like magic, right? So if you're going to tell a child, you kind of help, end up making a child believe that he or she is slow, then that kid ultimately will end up learning slow, right? And if the teacher believes a child is bright, then the teacher will accordingly treat the child, and at the end of it, the child will pick up cues suggesting that he or she is bright, and they will end up, fulfilling it and becoming like bright, very bright students. And so that's about Pygmalion effect. And before we go on, there's also something else that I really wanted to discuss with you, and that's the concept of everyday leadership, right? Everyday leadership. Why do you need to be practicing empathy, right? Those who are sitting here, we always believe that these sort of skills, what leaders, or like people who sit at the helms of organizations, be it educational institutes, wherever, these top people, they are the ones who need to practice leadership. They are the ones who are known as leaders, right? Leadership for us is people who are at the top at the end of the day, right? So do you guys want to tell me who a leader is according to you? Just type out in the chat, who is a leader for you? Anyone? Who grows people? Brilliant. One who shows the right path. Yeah, excellent. Who leads, who's a role model, a representative for people. Yes, stands with us during any need. Brilliant. Yeah. Yeah, this is what so people with, you know, certain very, very beautiful qualities are the ones we generally consider as leaders, right? One who understands and promote others, one who inspires with their actions, one who stands with the weaker ones and uplift them. Beautiful. Inspires others. Well said, you guys. Yeah, these are, you know, qualities that we believe that a leader should have, who can lead a team and considers one among them a person who leads, inspires. Yeah. So, but I would like to, you know, just take a deviation from there and say that, you know, leadership is, in all honesty, not, you know, in my humble opinion, not all about, you know, someone who can lead and inspire and someone who's at the top who can uplift someone who's weaker or anything else like that. And this is where the whole concept of everyday leadership comes into, you know, comes into play. And in order to explain what everyday leadership is to you, I want to share another story, right? It's an instance, a personal, you know, experience that I had while I was delivering a workshop on empathy to the faculty and student services team at this university, right? It was in Dubai. And we got into a discussion around the concept of everyday leadership. And then what happened is one of the participants, he works as an examination controller over there, right? So examination controllers are the one who kind of ensure that, you know, yeah, Gita says who takes responsibility of failures and gives credit to others for success. Yeah, again, a very, this is how we definitely look, you know, at who a leader is. So coming back to my story, so yeah, we went, so there was an examination controller. I remember his name was Saad, right? He was just talking about the story that he experienced when he was, you know, he had just started work. It's a very simple and an ordinary story, which, but you know, I just felt it's very profound, and which is why I want to share it with them. I mean, with you guys. So on his first day of work, what happened is he entered a hall. It was his first day of work, and you know how nervous and, you know, difficult it can be your first day at work. You're going through all these sort of, you know, emotions, and so he enters a hall full of students waiting to write an examination, and it was his responsibility to get them into an orderly queue and then get them to take their seats for the examination, which, when it comes to a huge crowd of students, does not seem like an easy job, right? And so, being new, he feared that the students might just ignore him if he makes some command, and he would end up looking foolish. So he was all worried, oh God, what am I going to do? And so he was just standing there perplexed as to what to do. And, you know, how am I going to just, you know, tame this huge group of students? And exactly at that point in time, one of his colleagues, this colleague's name is Bilal. Bilal walks up to Saad and tells him, you really don't have to be worried. Just voice the instructions and trust me, the students will obey whatever you say. So Bilal just says this, and Bilal quickly walked off to continue with his work, right? And having gained a little bit of confidence from what Bilal said, my friend Saad, he immediately started instructing students to form a queue and then take up their respective seats. And to his surprise, students immediately started obeying him. They did exactly what he said, and he was like, oh, this wasn't too hard, right? But the beauty of this, you know, the story that Saad told me is that ever since that day, every single time Saad doubted his ability to do something, he would think back to what Bilal had told him. And apparently it always gave him the confidence to overcome any sort of anxiety he has faced later on in life, right? Imagine just a sentence that Bilal said, and years later, in fact, it was 15 years later in the empathy workshop that Saad was actually narrating the story about Bilal, right? And we all smiled, you know, thinking about how Bilal, no, none of us, including Saad, knew where that guy is, right? None of us knew his whereabouts, but he's somewhere in the world without even being aware of what an impact he had actually managed to make in somebody else's life. Think about it, right? You know, and I shared this story to remind you of what a powerful role each and every one of us play on a day-to-day basis in impacting those around us. And by that virtue, I would say each and every one of us are a powerful, powerful leader, right? And it's not just something that's, for a couple of people who are at the top. No, in the sense, every single day, a parent, in my opinion, is the greatest, leader the world could ever have, because everything that kids learn and the way they grow and everything depends on the way a parent kind of deals with that kid, right? I mean, and so a parent by that sense is a powerful leader. Teachers, they are powerful leaders. In my humble opinion, teachers are the greatest asset to a society, second only to parents. Because the number of people I know, even when, in several workshops I've discussed everyday, leadership, the number of people who have actually come up and spoken about a teacher who, when they were a kid, actually said something nice to them or did something beautiful for them. And because of that, they ended up, they ended up choosing a career, or decided to become something in life just because of that one teacher. How many of us know a maths teacher or a science teacher who taught so beautifully that we decided to go ahead in that stream, and we became successful and really good at that one particular subject, right? How many of us know people like that? So aren't they true leaders? Aren't they the ones who are actually creating a huge difference in the way the world itself works, right? And so that's how powerful each and every one of us is, right? And this power we hold also makes us immensely valuable, right? It makes us immensely valuable. The small and the big things that we do on a daily basis may seem ordinary and of no power to us, but know that each and every one of us has impacted, are impacting, and will continue to impact several people, right? And you are therefore of more worth than you can ever imagine. And this is all the more a reason why we must also live our lives very, very responsibly, because those who take inspiration from us, they shouldn't be impacted negatively. On the contrary, they should be impacted positively, right? So yeah, so I just wanted to also mention this concept of everyday leadership. And I really wanted to keep aside 15 minutes for any questions that you may have. And so before that, I'll just quickly summarize what all I had covered. We looked at what empathy is, right? Through the story of Harriet Beecher Stowe. We discussed the definition of empathy. We also looked at what cognitive empathy, affective empathy, and compassionate empathy is. We discussed the importance of boundaries, right? Boundaries where, even when you empathize with somebody, their world is theirs and your world is separate and distinct from it. There needs to be a very healthy boundary there. We discussed that. We also discussed, when it comes to empathy, that empathy is not projection. Empathy is very different from projection, right? And then we discussed self-empathy, the root of it all, right? Where you really need to be aware of where you are, and you really need to, you really need to learn to center yourself, so that it's only when you are centered and you are regulating yourself, will you have the space, for other people. Only then will you be able to hold space for others, right? We discussed that, and why empathy. I gave you a little bit of, research around the benefits of why empathy is needed. We looked at roots of empathy program, right? And then prejudice. And I forgot to mention that the reason why I always discuss prejudice when it comes to empathy is prejudice is the greatest barrier to empathy. You really want to empathize with somebody, the one thing that's, the one strong factor that's stopping you is prejudice. And which is why it's important for us to understand our prejudices and fight our prejudices. And we also looked at how, a subconscious sort of, a bias may come up. And for that, we did a small activity where we looked at a picture, and then we looked at who that person actually is. And we realized that, it's impossible for us to really understand a person completely just by looking at somebody. So, and then we also went on to discuss, this was more or less everything. But along with that, we also discussed what the power of, having, reasonable expectations about students or people around us are, right? Through this concept of Pygmalion effect, they really tend to, have an impact on those others. We also discussed everyday leadership. So this is more or less what I wanted to cover. There is, if there is time, I may cover towards the end some, a couple of other things. But for now, I would really, really want to know, whether you have any questions, anything, any comments, whatever, like about what was covered so far. this is an opportunity where you can ask anything empathy, and I'm more than happy to answer. While we wait for questions to come, and we hear questions, during this wait, I'll just give you because I'm pretty sure at least some of you might have had this question about what are some practical ways to build empathy, right? And so because of that, I'll just give you a couple of tips, or at least to begin with. Having worked in this domain for several years and and studied a lot around empathy, it's an ocean. There is so much that I can tell you, and there's such depth that we can go to. But to begin practicing empathy, the first thing that I would encourage all of you to do is get to know yourself better, right? When you're overcome by emotions, how do you react? How does your body react? What is your response like? What are the thoughts that come into you? And what are ways in which you can center yourself, right? Meditation is a powerful centering, technique. Those who practice centering, there are a lot of such similar, or various sort of practices that you can do. But something that I would really ask you to do, like I said, right, just mindfulness, exactly. So that's what we try to attain, right, through centering and whatnot. So being mindful of what exactly you're going through inside and calming yourself, regulating yourself, then you will be able to hold space for others. That's the first thing. The second one, to build empathy, the second tip I would give you is listen, radically listen. I mean, how many of us listen these days, right? And more than often we listen so that, we can like respond. We don't really listen for the sake of it, to just know a person, because we're curious and we really want to hear what a person has got to say, right? We always are, we just want to retort back as quickly as possible. So listening, you won't believe it. In negotiation studies, it has been shown that, if a person, if both the parties are willing to mindfully listen and, reflect things back to each other and then go on with the conversation, the time that is required to come to, or to mend, that conflict is reduced by half. So ideally, if, a negotiation would have taken like 2 hours, you can kind of, come to a conclusion and a solution in less than 1 hour if you're practicing proper listening. It's powerful. Listening is, a huge part of empathy, and I would say a critical part of empathy. And the third one I would say is, take small steps, very, very small steps. Like, for example, today we looked at a picture and we tried to empathize with that person, right? Next time when you're on the road, when you're traveling, if you're a teacher, like, let's say when you're in the classroom and you're just like, observing students and you notice that one of them is a little off, or, just try to empathize, just practice, like, what is going through that person's mind? What would they be thinking, be feeling at this point? Right? So that is the third one, like, just small steps where you practice, slowly start practicing empathy. And I would also say conversations, don't judge people. Like I said, if there's somebody you just don't like, and sometimes very often you don't even know why, right? And it's mostly your stereotypes or your biases coming into play. So you actually, reach out to that person. If you're having a conflict of some sort with somebody, just actually have a long conversation. And in that conversation, listening should be what you focus most on. You're not having that conversation because you want to say anything, but you really want to understand, where is that person coming from? What are their thoughts? What are their feelings? What is that compassionate empathy act that I can take so that their life gets better, right? So these are some very easy and I wouldn't say easy. Empathy is in no way an easy skill. I know that. I've been trying and teaching this practice for such a long time, but despite that I struggle on several days to actually practice accurate empathy. So these are some ways in which you can actually practice empathy. Yeah. So I think the improving part is what I just covered, like some small steps. But see, it's again, some people just naturally have it. Like I said, all of us are, what do you say? We are a culmination of both our genetics and also the environment that we live in, and more or less if you have like a genetic structure that makes you naturally empathic to people, then obviously. But scientifically it has been proved that empathy is a learned skill. It is possible to teach people empathy, and through intentional practice, by intentionally practicing empathy, and through systematic training, empathy is a skill that can be built. It can be built in 98%. That's the number that scientists give. 98% of people can learn empathy, and the other 2% is because they have some defect in their brain. They actually have a physiological reason why they cannot learn empathy, but otherwise everyone can be taught empathy, right? But some people have an easier time practicing empathy because it comes naturally, or they have some sort of, and some people, they might have grown up in an environment where they saw people practice empathy regularly, right? If you grew up in a home where your parents were really, really empathic, they really always understood each other, and tried to think from the perspective of somebody, they had such conversations with you, then obviously empathy would come very, very easy to you. I mean, at the end of it, 0 to 7 to 8 years, that is the foundational character forming years of any human being's life, right? And during those years, if you were taught empathy really properly, then obviously it will come naturally to you as an adult. But otherwise, if you grew up in really, really difficult environments and empathy really was not a part of what you experienced, then it becomes a little more difficult to develop it. But every human being, like 98% of people on the world, they can be taught empathy. Yeah. So it depends. Again, like I said, empathy, at least in my opinion, is something you can practice with everyone, be it a murderer, be it someone you really hate, someone who has hurt you deeply. It is possible to empathize with them. But when I say that, you need to understand that by empathizing with a person, we are not agreeing to what that person did. We are not saying that, if I'm trying to empathize with someone who committed a murder, I'm not saying that murder is correct. No, I completely, I'm totally against the act that was done, but I can still try and empathize with that person. So one of the most, one of these misconceptions we again have is that when you empathize with somebody, you're also agreeing with them. You're also, oh, that's, you're kind of what do you say, agreeing, or going along with whatever act they've done. No, that's not what empathy is, right? So you can empathize, in my opinion, with everyone, even people who have hurt you deeply. I mean, I have a course, like it's a 6-month course. It's a long one, and the reason why it's 6 months with one session every month, and you have a lot of activities and whatnot in midst, it's called the certified empathic profession. The reason why it takes that long a time is because you need to come to that level step by step. Obviously today, all of a sudden, you're not going to be able to empathize with someone who has deeply hurt you. It is hard. It's called adversarial empathy, and adversarial empathy is really, really hard. But step by step. So you begin first with, like I said, self-empathy, right? And then you slowly start empathizing with the people who are immediately around you. First, you build your listening skills. You build the way, your skills around expectation. How do you manage expectations and whatnot? You learn skills like NVC. It's called nonviolent communication. How do you communicate with people so that it's highly effective? How do we say things? It is possible to say even the most rudest, the most hardest of things, but in such a beautiful way that that person really gets it. Right? So how do you learn? So, investing in building those sort of skills. Then you start empathizing with those closest to you. At your home, that's where it again begins, right? With your spouses, with your kids. How do you practice empathy there? And then how do you practice empathy at your workplace or whoever, there? And it's only after you, cover these sort of steps, and, it becomes a practice in your life, you will end up getting to a position where you will be able to empathize with even the most difficult of people. And you will, so it's always like, when I say empathizing with a murderer, isn't it important that we understand the humanity and why a person did what he did, and what better way than to empathize with that person? It's only through empathy that we learn, okay, this is the way a murderer thinks. These are the reasons, these are the experiences they go through in their life, which kind of makes them a murderer. So isn't that the way in which you can, learn about the sort of background and the sort of steps we need to take as a community in order to make sure that more people do not become murderers. So I feel empathy, yes, is a skill that can be practiced with anyone. Not at all, not at all. I think it is moral to kind of empathize with somebody, even people who have done wrong. I would say that is the highest form of morality. We are able to empathize with even people who have done wrong, but we are able to distinguish between their acts and them as a person, right? That core person, because at the end of it, just a question, like, imagine you grew up exactly, like if you're a believer in God or even otherwise, let's say your genetic makeup is not something that you chose, right? It was given to you, right? You just had it. You never chose your parents. You were just born into that, to your parents. You never chose the environment in which you grew up in. It was just given to you. So imagine you had the same genetic makeup as that of a murderer. Someone who recently committed a murder. Let's take, let's give them the name X. So you had the same genetic makeup as X. You grew up in the same sort of grueling environment or whatever. Like maybe they had a good life, whatever. Like, you grew up in the exact same way that person did. Isn't there a possibility that you would end up doing, there is obviously other possibilities, but isn't it also a possibility that you might also commit murder, right? I feel it's extremely important to understand that humanity, and I feel like very strongly that that is the highest level of morality as well. Being able to see the human and the difficult side in every person, right? And understanding the reason why they became what they are, even though even me, like I'm against, murder is wrong no matter who does, like, there is no way, like, that we are going to agree or, say that was okay. But at the end of it, there is the person who committed it, they also have a past, they also have reasons, and they also have, so understanding that while also not, acknowledging or, accepting what they did is the key. It's a balancing act, and, it's a very, very difficult mind space to reach. But I also think with practice and with time, it is something that all of us can reach. Yeah. I hope that answers the question. Yes. So see, again, empathy, just like any other skill, there is it needs to be practiced accurately, in the sense, in some cases, scolding a child is empathy, right? In certain situations, ending a relationship is an act of empathy towards yourself and that person. Because if you're in a very, very toxic relationship, where both of you are like really, really struggling in a relationship, then it's an act of empathy. It's an act of compassion to actually end that relationship, so that, life gets better for, two people. Similarly, over here as well, there is that balance that needs to be maintained. Like, for example, there's confidence and there's overconfidence, right? It's like that, like there's empathy, and there is also that boundary and that balance you need to maintain even when you practice empathy. So if a child is really, not doing homework properly, right, is not really doing it properly, then an act of empathy there would be like sitting with that child, really sitting with that child, and having a conversation about what are the why did you not do that homework? Is there something that's bugging you? Is there something that you find difficult about this work? Is there some help that you need? I mean, more than often what happens is we scream, right? As parents, we scream. As teachers, we are angry when somebody doesn't do a homework, and we are quick to assume, like, that and we are quick to scold them. But instead, how many of us, if we notice that a child hasn't done their homework, actually spend a couple of minutes? It just takes a couple of minutes, right? Not more than that. So at the end of a class, just call that person alone and just ask, is there a reason? Like, are you going through something that makes it hard for you to do the homework, right? Or if, so more than often there will be a reason, right, at the end of it, for them to not have done the homework. They either didn't understand, they were too busy playing and whatnot, or, they had their mind space somewhere else. So you can always, tell them as well, like, see, there is the problem with not doing your homework, well, is the fact that you will fall back in classes. So I think this is where, like I said, right, listening and having these conversations, long conversations, this is very, very critical to practicing empathy. Again, empathy for a certain, like for example, I belong to a certain, let's say, I'm an Indian, right? And I teach, let's say, in a global university where there are people from every other, like, corner of the world, and I'm practicing empathy only towards Indians. That's wrong. Again, that's biased, right? So empathy shouldn't make you biased as well, because obviously towards Indians, it'll be easier for me to empathize with them because they have somewhat of us, there's a lot of common points there. But so there are these sort of issues which you really need to also cover when you practice empathy. A very recent, just the other day, I was reading about how did you know that more than 82% of people would leave their current workplace and go to a more, a more empathic workplace, even if that comes with a pay cut. That's how critical it is to have a workplace, have an environment where empathy is nurtured. I mean, at a workplace, imagine a workplace where you're actually understood. You have a very difficult day, you go to work, you are like, really struggling to do your work properly. But you have a space where people are kind of really empathized. They see that you're going through a tough time. They're willing to maybe, give you space. And you ask for leave, they're more than happy to give you leave. They understand, they have a backup plan. So these sort of environments really nurture, and wouldn't you work better when you feel better? At the end of it, that's the thing, right? All of us at the end of the day in life are looking to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be heard. When we have something to say, we want people to hear it. We want to be seen and understood, right? And an empathic workplace would give you that. And when you get that, what happens is you're generally happier. Obviously, happy people, their productivity goes up. Imagine the sort of impact empathy can have even on the financial gains that an institution or an organization gets, just because people are just working better, right? Like I said, empathy can boost creativity, one of the most critical workplace skills of the 21st century, right? And in fact, most of my work is actually with corporates. I very little projects do I do with, educational institutions. I do them, but majority of my work is with corporates, because, corporates, they need that culture. Companies are beginning to realize that, without an empathic workplace, my employees are going to leave, they're going to be unhappy. In an 8-hour long day, employees may work for 1 or 2 hours. The effective productivity comes only to 1 or 2 hours, just because their mental space is not right. They're just not feeling good. They're not feeling cared for or well, right? So that needs to change. And if you make a person feel cared for, and if you actually empathize with a person, the chances that that person's productivity will go up, and medical issues will go down, right? A lot of medical problems are associated with mental stress and whatnot. So in a workplace where there is no stress or very little stress is, it's going to be a part of life. But if there is minimal stress, or, there are strategies to deal with stress, obviously employees are going to be more healthy, more happy, right? I'm surprised that you say from kindergarten you have heard about empathy, or you feel that this has been taught. But honestly speaking, no. Like, empathy is not really a part of. I came across this term during my college days, much later into my life. I mean, there are obviously situations where we practice it. I mean, in kids as young as 3 to 4 years. Again, experiments show how around 3 to 4 years, what happens is, kids, if there are 2 babies in a room and one baby cries, the other baby will actually give that baby a toy or something, so that the crying baby stops, right? So you have that natural inclination to help the other baby, right? But listen to this, like, even later, like, this is when you're around 3 to 4 years. Even later, 1 or 2 years later, when the same experiment is practiced, and what experimenters do is, they show one baby what sort of toy the second baby actually was playing with, right? When that baby was happy. And then when a baby starts crying, the not crying baby, they actually go look for the exact toy that the crying baby likes, and will give that toy to the baby. Such a beautiful example of empathy, practiced so beautifully, right? So in kids as young as that age, it is there. But then what happens is, over time, we are taught a lot of things, like, conditioning is a huge part of it. Societal conditioning, peer pressure, the sort of things we learn. I shouldn't say, see, there's a lot of beautiful things that we gain from education, right? From the educational system that we currently have. But I'm also a critique of some of the things that are not taught enough by the education system as well. So some of these peer pressures, and all these things that maybe you can even say fiction, movies, like all these sort of external things. What happens is, you end up getting into a place where you are conditioned out of that empathy sometimes. Imagine growing up in a home where one particular community is consistently negatively spoken about, right? That community is this, like, don't, like, encourage, don't become friends with people from that community. I mean, imagine a kid who's growing up listening to this, right? How is that kid, so obviously this kid like we said, the lens, right? This kid will grow up with that lens. And anytime he sees a person from the community that he has heard his family speaking about, he'll be like, oh, I'm not even going to befriend that friend. I mean, that person. So this is how, biases and all of this will come into play. And so obviously our experiences will kind of somehow mold us into something that's not really, the best empathic version of ourselves. So which is why that mindful practice, that intentional practice, and, learning about these sort of things, these sort of systematic trainings, these are important so that you gain it back and bring it back into your life. Yes, absolutely. The first thing I would say is, listen, even to primary students. I've seen so many times, I've done this too, like with my nephews, sometimes they come, they have something exciting to share, but I'm in the middle of something and I just don't give them the attention they need, right? I'm not saying you need to give so much attention to kids, all that. No, that's not it. They need to learn to deal with boredom. They need to learn to deal with their own kind of isolation, whatever. But at the end of it, these sort of, think about it. How many of us have memories, like, strong memories from when we were a baby, or like, like maybe 4 years, 5 years, whatever, when you really, really needed some emotional support, it just wasn't there. You were trying to speak to your mom or your dad or your teacher or someone, in school, someone said something rude to you and you were so deeply hurt. You really wanted to speak to somebody, but you just didn't find anyone around you. So these sort of experiences, right, that they literally shape the person that you are, right? And primary school children, I admire primary school. They are the one, I think they are the most important people in the whole world, more important than any doctor, any politician, because they literally are crafting the next generation, right? I mean, it's such a critical role that they play in the society. Right? So listen to kids, like, when, especially in a classroom, if somebody is crying suddenly, some sort of issue happens over there, and, there's one kid pushes the other, and, one kid is crying, whatever, just listen to what they actually have to say. It's you need patience for this, and it may not always be possible, but when you can, try to listen deeply to what they are saying. The second thing I would suggest is talk about feelings. Start talking about feelings. Research says that when kids grow up without complete awareness about what every emotion is, like, for example, a kid doesn't, people who do not know exactly what happiness feels like, who do not exactly know what sadness feels like. So they know they're going through changes, but they don't know that it's sadness. People who do not have that sort of clarity, they are the ones who face the most pressing of mental health issues later on in life as adults, right? So which is why it is important to talk about feelings with these young kids. If somebody, like I said, an example where somebody pushes one kid and that kid is crying, instead of screaming at the kid who pushed, just ask him, like, why did you do that? What happened here? And did you, and what are you feeling right now? And then see, look at what the kid who fell is feeling. What do you think she is feeling? She's sad. Look at, why is she crying? If she's crying, she must be feeling something, right? And so you really need to have these discussions about feelings and explain things to them in terms of feelings. That will be very, very good, right? That'll really build a strong emotional foundation in kids. And so talking about feelings is important. Getting to know a little bit about the background, right, of these children is also very, very important, right? Because what sort of a family they come from, like, even if not in depth, but you also know what sort of needs they possibly have that are missed out in certain areas. So, is there anything that you can complement over here in your classrooms? That's something I would suggest. Another thing is, we always ask children, say sorry, say thank you. But at the end, you're also explaining why they need to say sorry, right? Next time you ask a kid to say sorry, tell them, explain to them, this is why you need to say thank you. This is why you need to say sorry. And, so just go into a little bit of depth over there. Another thing is to give small empathy and compassion tasks. I mean, we don't have like the Roots of Empathy program here, but you can always create one, right? So, maybe just give, maybe next time there's somebody who's very upset in class, maybe you can ask the rest of the students, what do you think that person is feeling? What do you think this kid is feeling? How can we make her day better? What is the one small thing that we can possibly do to brighten up, a kid who's crying? Stuff like that. And give them tasks, empathy tasks, compassion tasks, their bus driver, or like, let's say the security who takes care of, the things in the, in the school premises, right? Ask them to make a thank you card for them. Like, all these small activities, these itself, like the very few things that I've told you now, this in itself will make a huge impact and a huge shift in the way, yeah, empathy can be taught. Yeah, I hope that helps.